Welcome to Aon at the Top, where I have the honor of interviewing some of the most distinguished executives, C-suite, and board members about their journeys and paths to success. I'm your host, Nicole Ward, the Senior Vice President of Sales at Aon. In this series, we draw out meaningful insights and candid perspectives on navigating to the top. At Aon, we help you make better business decisions by turning risk into resilience. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Aon's podcast series, Aon at the Top. I'm your host, Nicole Ward, the Senior Vice President of Sales at Aon. And in this series, I have the honor of interviewing some of the most distinguished executives, C-suite, and board members to draw out meaningful insights and candid perspectives on how they navigated their way to the top. Today, we get to welcome CEO and founder Laurel Mintz. Laurel is a powerhouse at the intersection of marketing and venture capital. As the founder and CEO of Elevate My Brand, she's spent the last 16 years leading award-winning campaigns for iconic names like Verizon, Paw Patrol, Sprinkler, and Squishmallows, really helping brands break through the noise and drive measurable growth. She's also a general partner at Fabric VC, where she invests in the next generation of consumer technology, health, and fintech startups. With a marketer's eye and a strategist's edge, Laurel is passionate about scaling visionary companies and amplifying diverse founders. Whether she's behind a brand or backing a startup, her mission is clear: to elevate innovation and create real, lasting impact. Laurel, thank you so much for being here. So grateful that you made some time to see us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is actually super close to my house.
All right.
Yeah,
I love it.
Pretty easy.
You're in the hood. I love it. It means we get to do another one sooner, right?
I love that idea. Yes. Well, we'll see how this goes. Hopefully I do well on this one, right?
I think you have this covered. Well, good. Well, speaking of the personal, I would love to get, rewind the clock for us a little bit and get inside your head about what was the outset of your journey and how is your career mapped in terms of the actuality of it versus your, sort of what you thought it might be, right? Help us out. Take us back a little bit, if you would.
The planning versus the reality,
right? Exactly.
Well, it is a bit of a long story, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. But I always thought I wanted to be a lawyer. That was the path for me. I was an undergrad at UCSB, then I did my JD and an MBA at Rutgers on the East Coast. We were just talking a bit about the East Coast on our pre-conversation. But the universe had a different plan for me. So I came back to LA from the East Coast. I took the bar exam, passed my first time, and practiced for a very short while at a large international firm that most of you would probably know. And then the universe kind of came calling and said, that's not really what your plan is. And my dad got really sick. He's healthy now, but he had stage 4 bladder cancer, which luckily he survived. Everyone please knock some wood on that one. So at 26, I stepped in and was interim CEO of his company, or his interest in a company called Bassett Furniture. Do you know the Bassett brand?
I do. It rings a bell for sure.
Yeah, it's a big big national furniture chain. And if you told me I was going to be in the furniture industry in my 20s, I would have told you, something was wrong with that. But anyways, sold that in 2009, started the agency at that same year. Now, as you said, that's been around for 16 years, 400 brands later. And because of my legal and business background, a lot of private equity and venture firms would come to us to market them. And a few years ago, one of the GPs was like, you need to go do this work. You have this insane early deal flow, this marketing special sauce, and this commitment to diversity. And honestly, I was like, no thanks. I'm an operator. I don't need a second headache. And then frankly saw a lack and a need in the marketplace and a real business opportunity. And that's really how Fabric started.
Amazing. And would you say, and it sounds like that the one conversation was a pretty pivotal moment in getting you to think differently about the course of events and how you could move forward. Was there something earlier on that was either a fail or a win or something that happened that woke you up that there was going to be a next step, that there was going to be a change in the future?
Well, I feel like every step along my career has been those kind of pivotal moments of change. And I share this very openly because I think it's really important that we have candid conversations, not just the highlight Instagram reel. And so when I stepped in to take over my dad's company, I realized he was totally over leveraged. So he was a really great salesman, which is where I get my schmooze skills from. But he was not the best operator. And this happens a lot. So I had to come in and clean it up. And from there, recognize and realize the conversation around money in my own head. So when I started making real money at the agency, I realized I had this kind of messed up perspective, and I ended up joining a women's investment group. And that was like the change for what I now know is my future in venture. So it was kind of like all these really interesting points along the path to get me to having real conversations, mostly with women. I'm really proud to say 70% of our investors are diverse and 40% are first-time check writers into the asset class, because I do a ton of education that I didn't have early on in my career.
I think that's so applaudable. I think it's something that's so we as women don't talk about money enough.
Yeah.
And I think men do it really well.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, hey, I got this deal going over here. Do you want in on it, or
exactly.
get some of this? And I think we don't. And I think that women can cheerlead for each other a lot, but we don't always need more cheerleaders. We need actually people that are going to help us get what that next thing is, whether it's revenue in our bank account, whether it's a board seat, et cetera. And having those real conversations around money, et cetera, is so important. So I think that's amazing that you do that.
Yeah, I didn't know that was going to be my life's work. And I always say that that's the work in the work, right? Raising a fund and deploying it is one thing, but really having these meaningful conversations, I think that's really the joy in this work. And I have a talk I do called Better Than a Birkin, From Luxury to Legacy. That does exactly that. Talks about kind of breaking down money barriers and opening up a better dialogue. And I think it's coming. Like, there's this huge wealth transfer that's about to happen. So we hope that we are at the precipice of real change in those dialogues.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. And, you know, some of the things you said in there give me an inclination of what your sort of beliefs and guideposts are when it comes to values. But can you say more specifically what really guides you from a principal perspective and where that might have come from?
Definitely from my parents. I mean, I used to go with my mom and paper like early in the morning, 4 a.m, 5 a.m, when there were political initiatives that she really believed in. And so very early in my youth, I realized the value set that was important to me that was instilled by her. And that has really carried through my entire career. We always try and do good and do well. I don't believe both are mutually exclusive. And the fund, again, is just like an extension of what we built at the agency. We'd worked with over 400 brands. We realized that over 200 were diverse-led and almost 40% had raised capital. So that was really our existing flywheel of deal flow and founders. And this is really the extension of that.
That's awesome. And your mother would be thrilled to hear you say that, I am sure.
Yes.
Good. And as a leader, how do you lead? How do you inspire your team or the teams that work for you? And how would you define your leadership style?
Well, it's certainly changed over 16 years of running the agency side. You know, when I first took over my dad's business, I had no idea. You know, I've always been a very strong person. I think one of the things you and I always agreed on and came to see in each other. But leading a team is something very different. And when I stepped in to run my dad's company, I was the youngest person in the entire company by probably 15 years. And I was the only woman. Well, actually, there was one other woman, but I was the youngest person and the youngest woman for sure. And so early days, I would say I had to have a lot more bravado than I do now. I think now it's more about transparency, service leadership, and making sure that the team doesn't feel like I'm trying to control their process, their perspectives. We really have an amazing culture on both sides of my companies. And I'm very proud of that. We do a lot of culture building. That's the thing I find to be most important. The people side of any business is the most critical component. And you can make as much money or, you know, be at the top of the food chain. But if you have to constantly hire new people because there's churn, both on the client side and on the team side, then you're doing something wrong. And so, again, very early days, I might have had a different perspective and had to show up and felt like I needed to be, you know, the boss. And now I'm happy to take a back seat and let my team really shine and step into play and bring joy and really focus on the culture building side.
That's great. And I think that allowing yourself the grace of that transformation is so important. I think when we do start out and we are younger, coming into things, there is that sort of, oh, I've got to be this, I've got to be that. And
Totally.
especially if there's any insecurity in us at all, and especially if you're early into leadership, right? But I think that evolution and knowing that we will evolve and transform is so important. I think it's a great
Absolutely.
message.
And I love having those transparent conversations because, again, I think people see the highlight reel. And I know that I'm put on this planet to show people what's possible. And the only way to really do that is to be super transparent and honest about your fail points. Like in my early days at my agency, had a much bigger team. I was a little bit more of a bullish leader. And I had a kind of a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, where I was waking up every day and very unhappy. And I thought, wow, there's something wrong. And this is my role to fix, right? I created this. If I don't want to come into the office every day, certainly no one else wants to either. And so I intentionally went to everyone in the office at the time and I said, are you happy here? And almost everyone said no. And it was heartbreaking, but it was very clear to me that I needed to make a change. And the truth was that at that period of my agency life, people had been with me since day one. They were with me for like 8 or 9 years at that point, 7 or 8 years maybe. It was time for a change because the agency wasn't the same either. And so we said to each other, everyone in the group was like, let's figure out a way to transition you out of this role, find someone that's excited and new and fresh and sees who we are today and put you in another position, maybe external to the company, which ended up happening, where you can, continue to grow and thrive in your career. And it was just this like very pivotal moment. Again, I could have crawled into a hole and cried and, woe is me. And instead I said, this is my responsibility. I need to show up and fix this and make sure that the people that have brought me to this point are respected on their exit as well.
It takes a lot of courage to do that. And I think that's great. Not a lot of leaders have that. So I think it's terrific. And it kind of leads into my next question, which, I ask this question of everyone, but my grandmother famously quoted to me that poop makes great fertilizer. And so I share that every episode and with the, follow-up of a question around what was your poop, right? Like what was your fail or and maybe it's what you just shared, but, was there something, a deal, a job, whatever it was, that at the time really felt like failure, but that ultimately was a real fuel to success?
I would say that story I shared is pretty close to the poop for sure. And one of the reasons that happened is that we were working with one of the famous brands that you mentioned in the intro. And the leadership of that team was really not great. Like they were screaming. Like I've never been screamed at on a call as a client, right? But they were feeding the agency and this big team that we'd built. And so we kind of needed to take it a little bit. So I think that was probably the poop. And I will also say, usually it's like hurt people kind of thing, right? So I knew it wasn't really about us. And we were there on a mission to launch and create this incredible brand that we eventually sold to private equity a few years later. So I'm super proud of the work that we did. But I think the poop was the relationship with the leadership team and how that impacted my team, which eventually led to that big transition that I mentioned.
All part of the process, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. And sacrifices along the way. I know for many of us, we don't even recognize them at the time, that they're a sacrifice. But when we look back, we're like, wow, I gave this up to get this and it was worth it or it wasn't, right? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
That's a great question. People often think that I gave up having a family. And I talk about that a lot as well, because that was definitely not the case. We were very intentional, my husband and I, about what we wanted our future to look like. And that didn't involve kids for us.
Same.
Another thing we always agreed on.
Yeah.
So I think people can look at you as a leader and all the things that you built, and they're like, oh, well, she gave up, having a family. She gave up all these things. That was not the case for me. It was very intentional, our decision in how we built the future of our life together. definitely given up a lot of sleep. I'll tell you that much for sure. Yeah, and I think maybe a little bit of a social life, but I'm pretty connected and very much in tune with who I am as a human. And I have a really great circle, though it's small, around me of friends and family that I keep close. So I don't know if I feel like I gave up that much, to be honest. I think from the outside looking in, maybe people would say more, but the only other thing you would say is I gave up, maybe not having as many gray hairs if I'd gone and taken a W-2 as a CMO of a bigger brand. But I don't think I'm employable at this point. I think that I'm, once you're an entrepreneur, you can't really look back.
It's in your DNA
Yeah,
and you're
for
just
sure.
going with it. For sure.
sure.
Absolutely. And if you were to think about folks that really were examples to you or mentors to you of how to do it, how to make the hard decisions, how to lean into putting strategy and vision, before the thing, right? Outside of your parents, which I know it sounds like were a huge influence, are there mentors or folks that really guided you on your path that you went to, to sort of bounce things off of, et cetera?
My god sister, Amy, who runs an agency called Gershoni up in San Francisco, super creative, and her skills is people. And I feel like I got a lot of that from her. And I also blame her and thank her for the idea of running an agency because it's certainly not easy. She's been pivotal in my life. She's 7 years older than me. I feel like she's my older sister. So she was certainly someone who was instrumental in how I took the path and built my career. And then I would say folks like Chelsea Grayson, who you had on the podcast. She's been a longtime friend. She's on my board now currently for Fabric. So folks like that who I've had in my life for a long time have been fantastic. And then I'd say the other piece is I've also been intentional about having great coaches along the path as well to help me issue spot and solve for the pieces that maybe I'm not seeing or maybe not great at each stage along that path.
And I think that takes it's a credit to you because I think it takes a lot of vulnerability to go, gosh, I'm really good in these 3 areas, but these 2 not so much. So how do I offset that with input that's additive? I think that takes a lot of courage to do that. Kudos. And in terms of folks that you've mentored, people along the way that you've brought along, how does that look for you?
I always say yes to anyone of the younger generation that wants a coffee conversation, ask questions. So I get inbound from most of the local schools every month, and I'll always do a 20-minute coffee chat with them. So I don't know if I would call that mentorship necessarily, maybe like a quick fire mentorship for those who come to me. And then we've got a fellowship program on both sides of my company, and that's really been instrumental in allowing these young folks to come into careers and realize what they're good at and what they're not. And that we've had dozens of folks come through that. I think my existing team on both sides of my houses have been, I don't want to say that I'm the mentor to them, but I feel like, well, first of all, I'm certainly the old in the room in all those rooms at this stage. And so I've got a lot of career expertise, life history, lived experience that I showcase and share with them on an as-needed basis. So I've had a lot of really great opportunities, both just inbound from folks who've seen me on podcasts or on panels, my existing team, historical team, and then, anyone who needs support along the way.
That's outstanding. And what advice do you have or would you give to women who are out there, who maybe are on a W-2, who are thinking about starting up their own firm, their own thing, entrepreneurial, endeavors? What advice would you give to this woman? Because hopefully there's a lot of folks in our audience that are either aspiring to get to the C-suite, aspiring to be an entrepreneur, et cetera. So I'd love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, we call them wantrepreneurs.
Wantrepreneurs. I love that. Oh my gosh, that's great.
God, advice for them. I don't know. I think my advice now would be very different than historically it might be, because things are changing so quickly with AI and everything that's coming down the path. And I don't know if we're upskilling our next generation. I think it's a very challenging market right now. So I don't know if the entrepreneurship journey is for everyone, for sure. But I also think that the skill set of understanding how to use different generative AI platforms is going to be one of the most valuable pieces moving forward. So I would say that's number one. Number two, make sure that that's really the path that you want to go down. And I actually have an exercise that when folks come to me, I have them do to determine where their kind of skill set is, whether they want to go laterally or up market to a different firm or whether they're thinking about entrepreneurship. And it's actually called red light, green light. So what I have them do is I have them look at their calendar for a 30-day period, highlight everything in green that like really lights them up, the things that really gets them excited, highlight everything in red that just drains the you know what out of them. Everything else is negotiable. And based on what you see in those red and green areas, that really should be how you focus your career. And so a lot of times that will play into the decision to be an entrepreneur. I would say more often than not, it's just not part of people's kind of, I don't know, core expertise, right? Like you can't teach, I don't believe you can teach entrepreneurship. I think that you can learn skills of entrepreneurship, but like the courage to step out on your own. I mean, I was kind of flung out on my own, so I don't even know if I have this, but it's something very different. So I think you have to be really certain that that is a path you want to go down because it is a really hard journey. I'm still learning every single day.
Good thoughts.
No, and sorry, the last thing I would say
please.
is if you want to make money, like the entrepreneurship journey long term may do that, certainly has for us, but it's early days is really challenging. So if that's like, if you think entrepreneurship is this like super sexy solve for, you know, being unhappy at your current job, probably not the fix for you. I find a lot of folks just see kind of grass is greener. But I will say, you know, there's so much freedom in this world.
Yeah. Interesting. And in terms of if you were to put your, you know, your VC hat on, you know, how would you describe, you know, how you've made decisions, you know, as a partner in a firm, you know, when the stakes are really high, you might not have all of the information necessary, you know, how do you go about that sort of decision-making process? How do you move in that?
In terms of writing checks to
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got a really amazing team. So I am good at a lot of things. I'm also not good at a lot of things. So when I built the firm, the fund, I hired people around me and built a board of advisors and a venture board who was the who's who of the categories that we were focusing on. So we've got, you know, healthcare experts, Chelsea on CPG and consumer. We've got finance folks. One of my operating partners came from Ukaipa, so she has this like big private equity background. My principal, Jahara Tariq, came from M13, Atlas Peaks, and Moonshot, so she brought a lot of that traditional venture expertise and background. And then, so I could lean on them for the pieces that I was unsure of in the decision-making process. And then, frankly, I was like, I don't really know how you're supposed to do this, but I'm going to do this in the way that makes the most sense for me and is the most efficient. So we built out a really focused, operationally driven diligence process that I believe our founders, even if we don't end up writing a check, really, really appreciate. We do all the traditional diligence, financial diligence, founder diligence, et cetera. We use an AI tool, a third-party tool that looks at 300 points of data and then gives us a score. As we're doing that process, we take them through what we call the marketing diligence piece. We call it the thread count because fabric thread count, you know, got to keep it branded and marketed.
So clever.
And the great part about that is that they get this really detailed data-driven report from an omni-channel and competitive market perspective that they get to keep and use regardless of whether we write a check or not. But what that process allows us to see is, are their numbers real? How far are they from their competitors? Which ultimately tells us if our check's going to meaningfully close the gap for them. We give them a number on that side, and we then combine those two scores and invest in the top, call it 3 to 6 deals, depending on how much capital we have to deploy at that point of time.
I love that confluence, what you're talking about, of having your advisory board with varied skill sets, able to weigh in and sort of helicopter around an idea, and then bolstered with that sort of AI data and input. And that's super thoughtful and smart. And like you say, your founders, clearly appreciate that, right?
Yeah, we've had a couple of them say, like, this is the most like linear an operationally driven diligence process we've ever been through. And I'm like, thank you. But also, like, we didn't have an option, right? We needed to create it that way because as a solo GP, I have these folks who are certainly committed to the fund, but we're not their full-time job for sure. So we needed to create it with an efficiency in mind. So like I said, I didn't know how others did it, but this was the most effective way for us to do it from a time, budget, and in the best way we could for the founders as well. I think there's a really important angle there.
Yeah, I know. A super interesting approach. And, wearing my risk hat for a second, I have to ask, how you balance, that sort of big vision, big move, bold strategy move with risk, right? And that sense of like, well, wait a minute, we've got to also, protect ourselves a little bit. How do you balance that?
I think my husband would tell you that I am a flying cannonball type of person. So I am very risky. That's just kind of my nature, right? So the reason I surround myself with those other folks is because they can kind of pull me down from the clouds.
Choke the chain a little bit, right? Yeah.
A little bit.
Pull
but
the
you've
leash.
got to be just a little bit nuts and a little bit, out there to make a fund like this work. And frankly, venture is by nature a very risky asset class, but it is high risk, high reward. So again, in the operational process, I believe we've solved for some of that risk. We've de-risked by doing that second layer of diligence. And the thesis is if we can solve even 10% better than a typical fund, then we'll be returning alpha to our investors. So I think it's process, I think it's team, and I think it's just that second layer of marketing diligence, since that's our expertise layer. And I don't know, I'm sure you know a ton of funds out there, but most of them are spinoffs of like the big A16Zs, et cetera, and they don't actually have any operating experience or any real value add to the founding team. So I think those few pieces also set us up for success and help us de-risk the decision-making process. And then, of course, again, operationally, we've got our IC, our investment committee, and a very focused kind of funneled process to looking at deals, reviewing deal memos, looking at the financials and all of that to come to a final decision together.
And where does that, that cannonball analogy that you use for how your husband describes you, I love that, right? That bold sense of big thinking. Where does that come from? Because I mean, it sounds like a little bit of your secret sauce, I would imagine, right? That big thinking, that big strategy brain.
Yeah.
Where does that
thank
come
you.
from?
My dad said I came out of the womb like this, like screaming, ready to go, like, let's do this. Like that, the energy that I possess as a leader, I've always had. Again, that's why sometimes I say like entrepreneurship really can't be taught at core, right? And then of course I bolstered it with education. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, then I got to law school and I was like, this is terrible. But having those degrees also helps me show up in rooms differently, I think. Because you can have a lot of bravado and you can have that energy, but if you can't back it up and you don't build a case for your leadership style that is successful, then ultimately you're not going to prove the outcome, right? And people will say, well, she's all talk, right? So I think it's a little bit, again, I was kind of born with this, and then I was very intentional about building my educational background, my expertise, operating piece as well, and that really led into the fund. And then, as I said, early days in my career, I had this really messed up money story. And so, again, being very intentional, I joined a women's investment group. I was the youngest person in that group by probably 15 or 20 years. Actually, the leader of that group is on my board now and is an investor in the fund. So it's kind of a fun full circle moment. But I would sit there and very intentionally, again, because of who I think I am at my core, I would sit there and I would listen to them talk about deals and use all this jargon. And I would take notes and I would nod and pretend like I knew what the heck they were talking about. I absolutely did not at that stage in my career. And then I would go home and I would Google it and I would educate myself. And then I was like, oh, I get that. That's not that hard. If I can do corporate M&A, I can certainly understand the jargon here, right? And about a year into that relationship, they brought a late stage tech fund to the group. And I came home to my husband and I said, I know I'm new at this, but I really think we need to do this deal. And we corralled everything liquid we had at that time. This was almost 12 years ago, and we were kind of earlier in our careers and not making a whole lot of money. And I'm really proud to say that we will be exiting that position at the end of this year, top of next, at a 6.5x. So I think part of it is also putting yourself in the right room so that you can have those kind of narrative stories that you learn along the way, but you ultimately have this, I have this gut. On the deal side, I've always had it on the creative side too. It's a weird tell, I would say, but I always share with people, when I know something is right, I have a visceral physical reaction. The backs of my knees start to sweat. Like when a tagline is right, or when a deal is right, or when I'm super excited about a founder, I have this really weird visceral reaction. So I don't know if that was the perfect answer to your question, but
No,
yeah.
it's a great answer, and I guess tactically, are there podcasts you listen to, authors or thought leaders out there that you've followed that, any specifics there in terms of how you're, where you're getting input that you then digest and sort of move on?
Yeah, I really like Shelley Palmer. I think he's doing a really great job of kind of corralling the AI world. I think it's really interesting. There's obviously some marketing-focused podcasts. I'm so terrible with names, so I'll have to give them all to you and put them in the show notes.
All good.
But I read blogs and blogs voraciously. And I'm also really lucky to be able to interact with so many different entrepreneurs. We've got our podcast. It's been around for 6 seasons now? 6 seasons. Oh my gosh. And over 300 episodes. So when you get to surround yourself with entrepreneurs at every age and stage and scale, there's a learning that happens there just from kind of being immersed in that world as well.
Love it. And how do you identify on an ongoing basis or consistently your own blind spots? Like how do you, there's what we know we don't know, and what we don't even know we don't even know. How do you do that last one?
That's a great question. I think that my husband is a really good barometer. He's an entrepreneur as well, so I bring him up a lot. I was actually at Hampton's Tech Week recently, and I was hosting a panel, and they were asking about partnerships, et cetera. And I said, yeah, foreplay for my husband and I is business conversations, and everyone thought it was the most hilarious thing. But he's a very different leader than I am, and a very different entrepreneur than I am. So I think having him as a sounding board is really impactful for me. He's been running his company for 26 years, so doing something right there. Yeah,
Wow.
Pretty incredible. And then I really listen to feedback loops. My team will tell me, I don't agree with you, and that's okay. I'm always open to other points of view. And I think that if you're not learning, you're not growing, and that's the sign of, you need to retire. You need to either get out of that path or career, or it's time to retire.
Take you out back and shoot you, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So again, I think there's a lot of different angles that I try and be open to. I'm sure Mike, my husband, would say I'm not always the most open to that feedback, because sometimes you can get, you get insecure, you get your perspective is just so different at different times of your career. But I really do try and be open to feedback. I would say that's the best way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And in terms of the, kind of the VC space, how would you say, it's changed, and or especially since you started specifically, and where's it going, and what are some of the things that you're seeing that you're either really excited about or you're really concerned about? So it's like a lot of questions in there in one.
Yeah. Wait. So the first question was,
yeah. Well, how is VC how is the VC world sort of changed, and where do you see it going?
yeah, how has it changed? Well, there are more diverse GPs than ever before, which is pretty exciting. I'm actually in a WhatsApp group called Transact, and it's 300 female GPs, which is super powerful in and of itself. So I'm excited about that transition into a more diverse leadership under the venture umbrella. I think that, we're seeing shifts in the market, which are really interesting and are impacting how people invest. The education piece is also super critical. As I mentioned earlier, this great wealth transfer, that's going to be immensely impactful. And for those that aren't aware, I think most people are kind of conscious of what's happening, but there's a lot of women that are going to be coming into billions of dollars in the next, I think it's 5 to 10 years. And that is going to impact how venture exists and how it functions, because we innately invest differently, right? Women's health is on the rise. Women's health investing is on the rise, which I'm super excited and very bullish about. So I think it's a number of different things. It's like the markets are changing, the power and the money is shifting, the leadership within venture is evolving, which is fantastic. And that then impacts who and how we invest in different companies.
Yeah. Very interesting. And then the tag on question was, what are some things that you're really excited about right now or concerned about?
So this is going to be a very unpopular opinion for those women in the GP world that I was just talking about, but I still think that we have not even scratched the surface on what we need to do in terms of shifting capital. I'm in a lot of rooms and it's rah, rah, we're all in this together. It's really exciting. And I had a realization a few months ago that those are not the rooms I actually need to be in. Those are the rooms where everyone is already aligned and they don't need someone to come in and shake shit up. You know what I mean? So I think that it's an unpopular opinion, but 2% is still the percentage of capital that is being deployed to diverse founders. And most people know that number, and it is actually backsliding, unfortunately. But what most people don't know is that when we invest in diverse founders, they return on average at a 25% higher return rate. So let's be very clear. Like, I am certainly a bleeding heart, but I'm a capitalist first. And so the model here was very intentional. And because of that, I think I personally hope capital is going to be shifting in different ways, but we're not seeing it really just yet. So it's hard. It's really, really challenging to raise a fund. It's certainly challenging in this market. But the other thing I will add is it's a high risk investment, but that's because there's potential for high returns. And whenever there's a down market like this, the value that you're able to capture if you can still deploy capital is immense. We saw this in 2008, 2009, right? And people that were nervous and scared and like backing out of the markets really lost out. Whereas those that like were bullish, stayed in, doubled down, really made a lot of money. Like this, I always tell people, first of all, this is the venture vintage to end all venture vintages, because in the last couple of years, we were seeing stupid valuations, people just throwing money at dumb companies. And now those companies are requiring down rounds and discounts on equity, which means that if we have capital, or if you have capital to deploy, now is the time to do that. So that's my perspective on the venture ecosystem currently.
Yeah. No, I think it's super interesting. When you think about 10, 15, 20, I mean, you got a lot of runway left, but when you think about professional legacy and you afford yourself that look back over decades, what do you hope that you'll leave behind you? What will that legacy be?
Also, really good. You're so good at this. I think, like I said earlier in the conversation, for me, it's about the people. And when I write a check to these founders who've maybe never received capital before, and this is the first round they're raising, and they're so incredibly not just grateful, but they're so empowered to do the work and to continue on the path that they've chosen. Like, that to me is everything. If people don't remember my name, that's totally fine with me. To me, this is about building a better future, not from an egoic standpoint, but from I've built my life, right? I need to leave this world better than the way that I found it. And the only way I believe that we can do that is through reallocating of capital. So that is what I hope people see in the future, and that we can, when I pass, what's it called when you pass, when people write about you?
Yes, I know the word. What is that? Your epitaph?
Eulogy.
Epitaph.
Yes,
there we go.
We got there. I hope that people say, like, she had an impact, right? Like she founded 500, 1,000 companies, that went on to change the world. And for me, that's about really women's health. It's about certainly diverse founders, but it's about what they're then doing with impact, right? Again, doing good and doing well, not being mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm. Success is such a loaded word because it's so different from for everyone. what is success for you? Not taking finance or, financial metrics off the table, but what is success for you? And are you successful?
When I figure that out, I'll get back to you, I think. Because people do ask me that question a lot. Like, do you feel like you're successful, or what does success look like? And I find that I'm always striving for what is next. So I move the goalposts, and I think good entrepreneurs always do this. Not that they don't celebrate the wins along the path, but I think that you always have to keep growing and moving that goalpost. So I think success to me, were not a financial conversation, probably looks like, again, having that real impact from a national and hopefully eventually global perspective. But also it's the internal dialogue, right? The young entrepreneur that I was, the insecure lawyer, the 26-year-old CEO, like thrown into the fire, very different than who I am today. And so I think then I would have thought, I want people to think that I'm a powerhouse. I want people to think this, that, and the other. And that to me is success. I think today it's more about having low cortisol levels, being in control of my stress, slow mornings, really being able to choose the life that you want. And that is such a gift.
I think that really lands right, because that's an inside out version of success.
Correct.
And earlier on, and I think was the case for many of us, it was that outside in, version of what success is
Tell me
or
I'm
should
good.
be.
Tell me I'm enough.
Yeah, please, exactly. Oh my gosh, yes. See, I've got the thing, the car, the whatever.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a great answer. And in terms of, other thoughts for either any questions that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you, or, are there any other sort of parting thoughts or things you'd like to put out there?
Parting thoughts. Well, I'll tell you what my closing sentence is when I'm with my team or when I'm on a podcast or whatever.
Ooh, bring it.
It's the same thing every time. It's go forth, be fabulous, and make change possible.
Oh, I love that. That is an exceptionally good, a good tagline, especially because you appear to be doing all of those things, especially the fabulous part with your amazing Cabo tan. No, I think that's wonderful, and so grateful, that you took some time to share about your journey. If people want to follow you, find you, invest with you, or or get investment from you, etc., how can they do all those things?
Thank you for asking. We are fabricvc.com. So follow us there. We do really fun open pitch days quarterly. So again, we're really about building an ecosystem. Anyone can join those, whether you're a founder or a funder. So you can listen in and understand what the process is like, see who's out there pitching in different ecosystems, and really build your network. So that's super fun. We do events all around the country. I'm actually flying out to New York again on Sunday to host some events out there. Obviously, our social channels, my personal channel is at Laurel Mintz on all the channels. I'm mostly active on Instagram and LinkedIn, of course. And then I think my last call to action is just like get out there and write a check. It doesn't have to be a big check. You don't have to be writing a check into venture, but learn the process. Get into the check writing habit. Do a couple angel checks and then work your way up the food chain. I think we just got to get people out of fear and into flow.
I agree with you so much. And I love what you said earlier about education, that education piece. I was fortunate enough to host a panel around women in investing and demystifying venture capital and angel investing. And I think I couldn't agree with you more that to dip your toe in the water, to do the thing, to try, right?
Yeah.
Are there specific educational tools or resources you might recommend for those listening that are like, okay, I'm willing to write a check, but how do I know it's for the right thing, or the right next step? Any suggestions there?
Oh my gosh, there's so many great platforms out there. Stella Foundation's a really good one. Gangels does a lot of syndicated deals, so you can really understand what those deal flows look like and what the papering looks like and what the diligence process is. They do a ton of education. How Women Invest, I think, is really doing
Great
great
one.
things. I love Julie. She's fantastic. I just saw her in New York for New York Tech Week. And again, we're all doing different things, right? You don't need to be, again, writing big checks. The one thing I will say, though, is when you write an angel check, like if that one company fails, then you're done, right? Like, so that's the highest risk investment you can make. Most people think about venture as super high risk, but when you think about it, you're actually hedging against the downside, right? Or the companies that will fail, which will likely be 80%. So that's why I like people to kind of dip a toe into either smaller funds or angel just a couple times, and then start to work your way up into venture.
And
But
escalate,
those are the folks that I, try and run side by side with, especially with new folks in asset distribution, like when they have new capital to deploy, which is pretty exciting.
Love it. Thank you so much for all the wisdom and the insight and being so vulnerable and sharing about your own path, your own journey, and growth. It's really inspirational. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. I think you caught me on like a very calm, like very grounded day. So I think when you are in those spaces, you can be more vulnerable. So thank you for giving me a platform to do that.
Absolutely.